Hi everyone, just wanted to review with you the activity that we worked on today and some big ideas about embryology. So remember, embryos are the forming, developing organisms before they're born. And we can look at the embryos at different stages in their development from different organisms and see how they may show evidence of different species sharing a common ancestor. So we would expect that organisms that come from the same ancestor would probably have some similarities in the embryos. And we would expect that organisms that come from different ones probably have some differences. Then you looked at 8 different organisms, roll down, and the different embryos in their different stages of development. Stage 1 is early on in development. Stage 2 is kind of midway through development, and stage 3 is pretty close to those organisms being born. And even though these organisms are very different in that there's a fish, there's a chick, there's a human, looking at these early stages of development, they seem relatively similar. And as they develop over time, we see more differences. And that's what we tend to see when we look at embryos of a common ancestor, because yes, all of these organisms come from a common ancestor, in that we can see that the early stages of development are more similar and later stages are more different. So similarities that exist in stage 1, they all have a similar body shape. They all seem to have these gills, the kind of slits on the side, and they look closer to their developed organisms in later stages of development. Here's another organism that has a common ancestor to us. Cinder, say hi. Okay. Do you see more similarities in the earlier or later stages? We tend to see more in the earlier stages. What differences exist? We see differences in head shape and the overall body structure after the first stage. We also then tend to see differences in the number and the types of limbs, whether we're looking at legs or fins. Do you see more differences in the earlier or later stages? We see more differences in later stages of development. And what trends do we see? We see that organisms tend to look more like their fully developed stages as we move forward, and organisms become more distinct from one another. They start to look more different. How can we use embryos as evidence for a common ancestor? Well, it all suggests that because they look very similar in their early stages of development. In stage 1, it's almost impossible to see that they're from different organisms. They all have similar backbones, and then as they get further on, they tend to get more of their distinct features, like fish have fins and pigs have that curly tail. We use those similarities in the early stages of development to show evidence of ancestry of a common ancestor. So this is just another piece of the puzzle in showing us evidence for evolution.